worth the wait. This is a very interesting augment. It is very fun to play around if you know what you're doing, but a lot of people are afraid to take it because there are a lot of bad options. However, I'm here to alleviate that tension and show that honestly, there really aren't that many bad options. If you know what to do, this augment is very, very strong. And then there's also a prismatic version. So this is for one costs. You will get a bunch of copies of a single one cost. And then the general gameplay pattern is to play around the 4-star version of that one cost. There is a prismatic one that does the same thing for 2 costs. So I have some lists talking about that, and I will go into what you do in each case. So yeah, this is worth the wait one. The best ones are the ones that have the best direction for something, and then the worst ones are like the ones that don't, where the unit itself doesn't do that much and the direction isn't that strong. So starting from the bottom, I think Steb, Darius, Irelia, and Trundle, they're the worst options. They're not bad though, because they still provide a lot of tempo. I think early game, these are better than like a lot of these, but just that late game, they're not as valuable. So Trundle is a scrap bruiser. It's really awkward to play him with bruiser because having a Trundle 4 doesn't really do much. It's, I think, better to play around scrap, and you just use Trundle as like your main tank, your item holder, and then you play around scrap. And Trundle will help you win streak. If you really want to, you can ignore Trundle 4 and play around Trundle 3, and then you just use the extra Trundles for econ. Same thing for a lot of these. It's like you can try to play around Trundle 4, but it doesn't do enough, I feel, to be worth putting items on him instead of other units like Corki and Echo and Rumble. Normally your comp will look something like this. You could probably do something like that. In Scrap, you aren't going to really put items on Rumble. You're just going to put your Echo items onto him, or your Rumble items, and then you play around Corki, and then this is just the normal Scrap board. And then Irelia, you can play around Sentinel. However, I don't think it's that necessary. I think it's probably better to play around Rebel, just because the Rebel board needs frontline a little bit more than the Sentinel board does, and Irelia 4 versus Irelia 3 isn't that big. You have Irelia 4, which is like a good tank. It's a good secondary tank to Alawi. It's early on, you'll have Irelia 3, so you'll have a pretty healthy transition into the full comp. And then once you have Irelia 4, you're still going to have your items on Alawi, but secondary tank items, if you have, or whatever, are fine on Irelia. If you want to stay on Irelia 3 and again sell the extra copies for gold, that's also fine, because the gap between Irelia 3 and Irelia 4 is not very large. Darius, you can play around Conqueror. So Darius is supposed to be more of a carry, but the problem is that he's not that, like, he falls off. Early on, he's a very good carry, and like your Darius 3 will steamroll. By the time you're stage 4, your Darius is falling off. So, like, he gets stuck too easily. So, it's better to just move stuff to Ambessa later, but you can play your Darius 3, win streak, and then you sell the extra Dariuses for money. The Conqueror board that you eventually want to play is something like this. Like, you will play Gangplank in the mid game, but eventually you want to transition just to have as many legendaries as possible. A lot of them can fit. You can also fit this and this. But I think in order of priority, it's like Rumble for Sentinel, and then Jace is pretty, or LeBlanc is pretty good. If you get a Victor, that's also good. And you're just playing Conqueror, and you're using this to win streak. Like, you are definitely going to make items for the Darius that you will eventually move onto Ambessa. That's how you're gonna play. And then Steb, same thing as Trundle. Bruiser's really awkward to play around. He doesn't do enough. At least Stab has a little bit more going for him in that you can do this. Whoa. He does magic damage and he heals a lot. And he heals his allies and he... You can basically hero augment this. Like, it's basically playing like the hero augment. And the bruiser board buys a lot of time. And he can heal quite a lot. He keeps them alive pretty well. Something like this maybe, because his passive works on redemption. And you just play any random backline. Alright. This is probably the easiest. And the benefit to this, with this you can play 4-star. And what this does, it like actually turns him into like, it's basically hero augment at that point. Like you get it for free, but you're not rolling for step 3, you're just pushing levels. By the time you get there, you're pretty good. You also, like these guys want 80 items, so you're not even contesting them. And like your bruiser board is like tanky enough. But like if you look at this, like these numbers are like pretty good, which is why I think it's like viable. At 4-star, the scaling is like, he actually does pretty good damage. I think the damage is like around 800. So like there's definitely something there. The other option, which is like the more standard option, is just to play around Enforcer. Step 4 is like a little bit less important because the rest of your board actually has damage. So you can sell the extra copies if you want. Because you don't have a good main tank here. You normally run a Lowy, but she's not an Enforcer, so it's like not as good. The best case scenario, you get an Enforcer emblem. If you do not, I think this one might be worse than the Bruiser version. However, here you would put normal tank items on him and hope for the best. Next we have Vex, who can be played in a couple spots. You can play her in Rebel. Her base damage is actually pretty good now. Her scaling is pretty good. You want to center her. The reason being, her AoE is more likely to hit more units in the center. The only problem is that you kind of contest Zoe on items. Like, you just split both, and you can delay your Jinx items. Because Vex does do a lot of damage. And Vex is a very strong unit early game. So this board, like, you just play like normal. The other option is to play around Sentinel. The thing is, you're rerolling anyway, so it becomes really awkward for your bench space. So I wouldn't like really advise it. But you can also play Vex 4 on this board with like this classic board. The Black Rose Visionary board. And she slots in pretty well, she does a good damage. However, with this variation, it's probably better for Morgana, which is why I think I have Morgana higher, yeah. Because with this you can just play Morgana 4 and Malzahar instead of Vex 4 and Heimer. But I mean, it is an option. And Vex is a strong enough carry that like it's kind of fine. Maddie, kind of similar to Stab. It's awkward to play Enforcer without an emblem, so you can do that. But the thing is, you can also play just around Sniper. Sniper, you don't even need that much. Like 2 snipers, fine. And there's a lot of snipers you can play around. Because you don't need to reroll her, it's better to look for something like this. You can play around Twitch, or Caitlyn, or even maybe all 3. Something like this. And then play around, like, you can play 4 Sniper. I guess you can play, like, even Sentinel or something if you want. You can play any kind of frontline. Sentinel, the Watcher. This is another 4 Sniper variation you can play. I guess if it's a little bit better. You could just play around this. Next we have Draven, which you're playing the same comp as Darius, but it's just a bit better if you get Draven. Because Draven 4 is single targets, so he actually has the means to kill units and does enough damage. This Draven you can just carry from the get-go is not really a transition. Draven 4 is just solid. It's a little slow, but it's usually pretty good. You do need secondary carries, but with Conqueror you can fit in a lot of stuff and you can figure out you want. You can play around Jace, Mordekaiser, Ambessa, Rumble. Like, you're not worried about your options. You just need to decide on something. Draven just wants anything that scales his damage. He gets a lot of AD from Conqueror, so you don't need to worry about it that much, but like attack speed, damage amp is usually the best kind of things to look for. And this variation is better than the Darius one because Draven doesn't get stuck on stuff very easily. And like the thing is, Darius getting stuck, he'll die, but Draven is at least a backliner, so he has to wait for pretty much his entire front line to die before he's being threatened anyway. Now we have a bit more of an interesting one, which is Zyra. I'm gonna say, I don't remember what it was, but I have a Zyra comp. So this is a Black Rose version. Zyra is actually very strong. You can get experiments in. Her experiment bonus gives a lot of damage. Like, it is a lot of damage. So Zyra 4 is actually very strong. The problem is just that the comp is awkward, and I probably wouldn't play this without. But I guess you can just transition into the rest of the frontline board and reroll like with something on its own. But yeah, you can play around this, and then you can itemize her with like. Honestly, I'm just gonna go back to this. I don't know if this is the best setup, but I think it's pretty good. And in this setup, Zyra just does a surprisingly high amount of damage. At 4-star, I think she does like 800 or 900 damage. And then with her experiment bonus, like she does a lot of damage. So she's definitely viable. And then the rest of the board fits nicely with Black Rose. You can get 4 Sorcerer in, you can get Bruiser, Visionary and stuff. And then you can just main tank literally whoever you hit. If you hit Mundo too early, or you can consider Swain 3 or Nunu 3 if you have the means to go for them. Because you don't have to reroll for this, so you are going to be pushing levels, and that's the benefits of having worth the wait. You are pushing levels so you can find better options. Like with an early Zyra 3, you're gonna tempo anyway. And you should have a lot of health and a lot of money. As long as your board is like decently strong. Next we have Morgana, which can be played in the she has options. So you're 100% going to be playing her with Black Rose. And the reason for that, it's just a strong staple board. But what you play with Black Rose has options. You can play her in the Visionary setup. This the exact same like classic one that was played, and the thing here is that with Morgana 4, she's actually a strong carry. I think the base damage is like 1700. So like this thing is going to one-shot stuff. So instead of playing around Heimer, you're just playing around Morgana. You're building the exact same Heimer items onto this Morgana. Or you can even deviate a little bit. Like maybe double buff Nasher or something. I'm not sure how the math turns out. It might just be that she does enough damage to one shot. So you just want her to cast as much as possible. I don't know how much AP she needs. But yeah. You can play around this, you can play around like more AP. And with this you have options. You play around Heimer or Malzahar, but like the Morgana itself is a really strong carry now. Another tech you can do with Morgana is to play before you have Morgana 4 or before you have Morgana 3. You could play 2 Morganas, and this helps spread her ability. And her ability is like a status effect where it doesn't stack with itself. So the 2 different Morganas can't hit the same targets. So you can use the second Morgana to make it more likely that their main Morgana is going to hit backline. Now that's like a 50-50 as to which Morgana hits the backline, or like the correct backline target, but it's pretty good to get to the backline at all, because if you have items on Morgana, that usually just means a kill. So, so yeah, when you're leveling to do something like this. Next we have Violet. Violet needs no introductions. I think everyone's sick of this comp. So you can either play this and reroll this, or you can just take, like, you play the comp, but you're just pushing levels, and you get your Violet 4 for free, but you're not really rerolling the rest. You're just getting, like, everything 2-star, and then just pushing for levels immediately. And you try to find, like, a Victor or something. You try to go 10. And you play around Violet 4 with, like, her normal items. And yeah, that's all there is to talk about that. It's very strong. It's not as strong as it was before, but it is very strong. You are kind of reliant on having good setup for your Vi, your Savika. Uh, you want to try to find maybe a Victor, because otherwise you will start to hurt when your Vander isn't that tanky. I mean, you can honestly hold Vander, and maybe if you can get a 3-star Vander, that's pretty good because you actually have a bit of time. But I don't think you should reroll for the rest, because that kind of defeats the purpose of getting all the free violets. You won't even have the bench space to hold all these things. So it is better to push levels, which is why I don't have this in S tier, I have an A tier. Okay. Singed 4 is insane. People didn't know about it for so long, but if you look here, this durability skills at 3-star, and then at 4-star it was skilled even more. It was used to be 72%, but they have since then nerfed it so that on, like, at this very moment, Singed, it says 60 here, but it's actually now 55 because they nerfed it, and then I think 4-star is like 60. So it is much weaker than it was before. However, what makes Singed 4 strong is that he is just a Sentinel, so you can play him in pretty much any comp with a Sentinel. It doesn't, like, really matter. Like, he's still a better tank than stuff like just Leona, pretty comparable to Alawi. So, in that regard, you just play him in the same stuff like you would normally do. You could play this classic one. You just play this, and you're good to go. Now the ones that are actually, like, insane. Powder is strong just because the threshold that this Powder 4, like, provides is, like, crazy. So you would normally want to push levels with this anyway, but it's really hard because Powder really wants 5 Ambusher, but if you were to reroll Powder, it takes a long time to get there. So, like Violet, you are just gonna push levels. Well, like all of them, you're just pushing levels. But I think 5 Ambusher on Powder is, like, really, really strong. And what this does to her ability, her base damage is, like, I think like 1,000 or something. So she will actually just one-shot everything, like, without fail. And yeah, like, what makes Powder different from Violet is that Powder much better covers for the weaknesses of her comp than Violet does, whereas Violet's comp has similar weaknesses in that, depending on pathing and depending on how certain units are positioned, they can kind of get stuck, whereas Powder will clear everything, so even if there's something to get stuck on, Camille is really strong single target, Smeech has backline access, and so does Echo. This Powder will wipe out anything that is not the main tank, and you should have the tools to take out everything else with your other units. Like, what is legitimately an option worth considering is to just to solo frontline Powder if she's 4-star, she's tanky enough to not die. Like, only do this if she's 4-starred. But she will clear everything so that when your units, by the time, she'll have enough time to cast before your units are like already there. So you'll leave just the main tank, and then by then you can maybe start getting like stuff to like wrap around. Let's say their tank is like a Garen. You can get like a wrapping situation. And sometimes you can just get them to start attacking backline immediately. But it is very strong. And it's easier to play than the Violet one because Violet is better when you're re-rolling the whole board, and Powder is better just pushing levels. Next we have Lux. So yeah, like I said, people have started to realize that Lux is OP because of Lone Hero. However, you don't need that to make it work. You can play the same setup if you want, and it's not even bad. However, you don't need to do that. You can also play a simpler setup. But the point is, with Worth the Wait, you shouldn't stay low level. You need to push levels and play around something. Duo carry options are Heimerdinger. You can play around Zoe. You can play around Malzahar LeBlanc. You can play around Jace. But just a simpler Lux like carry setup also works. And you can play around or two traits. You actually don't even need to play around any traits. Lux kind of exists. Like if you give her one Archangel, she'll do her thing on her own because of just the way her scaling works. Like if she has enough AP to shield big and one-shot one unit, it doesn't really matter what else you have on the board. So you could literally play like Bruiser. You can play Bruiser, you can play Watcher, you can play Sentinel, you can play Academy, you can play Black Rose, you could play Conqueror if you really want to. Automata, like Lux is very like not reliant on her traits, which is why I think she's like so strong. And finally, I think Amumu's the best just because the two comps that are the best are like the easiest to play and get at highest like placements right now are these two comps, and Amumu was played in both of them. Amumu 4 is also super tanky. So if whether you're playing Kog'Maw or Nocturne, Amumu is super strong early and he scales pretty decently. And like you're going to play him anyway for his traits, but if you put items on him and like he will like very easily get you a win streak. And at 4-star, I'm pretty sure he reduces incoming damage by 40 and does full 40 magic damage. Right now, this is just a product of the meta, but I do think on its own, like even like on the first patch, like Amumu 3 early on into like Fast 9, it was very easy to do. Like this was back when Automata was like terrible. So imagine how what it would be like now when Automata is actually good. So yeah, that is Worth the Wait 1, which is the gold variation. I have the 2-cost variation, which is the prismatics. And this one's a little bit more skewed. Because it's prismatic, it's most of them are going to be good, but how you play them is a bit more niche. I think the worst one, if you noticed, is Leona. The reason it being Leona doesn't really scale. She doesn't have scaling. Her durability doesn't scale. Like she's unironically a worse unit than Singed. Uh, and her damage isn't very high, so there really isn't much value in having this. I think this is the only bad option for Prismatic worth the wait. Like at least you can have Leona 3. I wouldn't go to Leona 4 because it doesn't scale enough, but you can at least get 2 gold. You would probably just play Academy or Sentinel or some variation and then just have a Leona 3 and a source of income. which isn't that bad. I think Rel and Set are similar. They scale a little bit better. Yeah. So Set at least does pretty decent damage. I don't think the stun scales, but at least he does okay damage. I think at 4-star, he does like 700 damage. Yeah, that seems a little high. I don't know, it's probably like 650 or something. But the point is, like, he does a not insignificant amount of damage, so it's not that bad. And then the other thing is that Rebel is like pretty happy having damage. I don't know how good it would be in Bruiser to take him and like give him like AP items. That might be a thing. I don't know if his damage is high enough early on. Maybe something like this in Bruiser. Yeah, this might be a tech, but I don't know how confident I am in it. Okay, I'm not gonna elaborate too much further. More realistically, you play sets 4-star in Rebel and you just have him as a better tank. Well, not as a better tank, as like a better secondary tank. Like the only reason I think he's better than Leona is because I think having set 3 or like having set 3 is better than having Leona 3. And I think there's an in theory an argument for set 4, even though at the end of the day it's still probably just going to be +2 goals every round after you have set the set 3. Maybe even after set 2. Rel, like similar to set, at least she kind of scales. Like her shield at least gets a bit bigger. She gets more armor and magic resist. So she actually does become tankier. The only problem is that a lot of the comps that you play her in don't really need that. She's okay in Conqueror. She's like Sentinel is not that necessary, but in the other option is to play her with Visionary, and that kind of opens some doors. Like the option that you have is to play her in Legendary Flex, and then you can main tanker, and that is actually a pretty solid option. However, I'm not convinced that Aurel 3/4 is better than Garen, which is why it's not that high. Okay, Akali, they nerfed her at the start of this patch. I don't know why, but they nerfed her, so Akali could be higher, but she's not, so she is here. She's the worst 2-star carry. The worst 2-cost carry. She's not even bad. If you get it for free, it's not bad, and then 4-star Akali is actually good. The problem is just that she's not that stable in the mid game because she's nerfed. You could realistically play her in Rebel, or you can play her in Quickstriker. The thing is, you're not really rerolling Quickstriker, so I think either way, you are just playing her with Mbessa, and you're not gonna go further than that. In which case, I think in this case, you can just play Rebel and play Tempo, and you can realistically play around the Cauliflower, and you duo carry, like, just the normal setup. Zoe, Jinx, or Mbessa, just whoever you have items for. And, like, since you don't have to reroll for it, it's, like, not bad. And if you don't want to hit a Cauliflower, I think you can sell her. I think a Cauliflower is, like, pretty good. So, if you do manage to get to that, then she becomes pretty good. I think what's the damage? It is like it's enough to just one shots whatever. So I think it's worth it if you manage to last that long. However, Akali early on isn't strong enough to be stable. So Camille was over nerfed. However, I think she got B-patch buffed. So now she's like not as bad. And if you get to Camille 4, then she's OP. But before then, you're gonna notice a fall off. So Camille, stage 2 is pretty strong. Stage 3, she's like pretty decently strong. And having a Camille 3 early on, it would be really good. So like if you get a Camille 3 like somewhere in the middle of stage 3, then you can extend your likelihood of like having high health by stage 4. The problem is that you get Camille 4 pretty late, and Camille like the ambusher board like will struggle in like towards the end of stage 4 and during stage 5. So you might just bleed out all your health there, but if you manage to make it past that, then by the time you hit your Camille 4, you're actually you're pretty strong. I do think Akali has the advantage that like the board she's played in is a little stronger than the Camille board, but you don't have to reroll, so you'll be level 8 pretty easily, and you can play around Echo, and Echo's pretty strong. And if you hit Jinx early, that's also pretty decent option. Like at the very least, Camille is a good tempo into the Echo Jinx comp. Next we have Zeri. Zeri, I mean, like not commonly a carry, like main carry, but you can. She's been slowly getting buffed, so now I think she's like pretty decent spots. However, still a bit underrated. You just play her in this. You don't have to reroll her, so you can just push levels for more things. Like you could probably stay on level 8 and you reroll Scar and you look for like Echo. But I think Zeri's actually a pretty decent carry now. I think she's been constantly getting buffed. And she was always on the cusp of being good. I think now she's probably gotten there and people haven't realized it yet. At the very least, like a B tier and A tier comp as the primary carry. But with Worth the Wit specifically, you have the benefit of not having to sit at level 6 to reroll her. So you can play around strong units and traits like 6 Watcher and 3 Firelights. You can even consider playing 4 Sniper. That's also an option. And finally we have Urgot. I think Urgot has the potential to be strong. It's just like a little annoying because you'd have to play him. You have options, but the boards that you're gonna play him with are a little awkward. So the first option is just to play on the emissary board with this, and then you play. I mean, okay, you could just play like this, and then like the normal stuff. You play around these two. The next option you have is to play something like this, which is just the more modernized Urgot reroll. But the only difference is that instead of spending time rerolling the other things, you're just going to be pushing levels, get to 4 artillerist as soon as possible. If you want, you can maybe consider going 5 experiments and playing like that way. Most a more stable version would look something like this. Right, I mean, this is pretty much just the Twitch board, except you're not playing around Twitch. I mean, you could still play around Twitch if you have the items for it, something like that. But you're just prioritizing Urgot. Like, I don't think you're gonna put Twitch on the experiment X because you don't have the room. But otherwise, the board is the same as that one, and you transition into it from the Urgot reroll board that you're not rerolling. But yeah, it's a very strong version to play, and Urgot 4 becomes ridiculously tanky. And the third option is just is vertical pit fighter, which also like has some merits. Like you don't have to stay low level so you can actually hit everything. So that's not even bad. S tier. There's a lot of S tier because there's a lot of really strong 2 costs. Renata. So the awkward thing is it's hard to reroll all the sentinels, but it's very easy to hit the traits that you want. So you just play Renata 4 and you don't reroll any of the sentinels because you don't have the bench space for that. But instead you could just easily hit 6 and then you can also hit 4 visionary easily and then call it a day. And like you do like your positioning or whatever. And so because you don't have to reroll at all, you just put stuff on Alawi because she's 4 cost tank. And pushing levels, it's just as strong. With 6 Sentinel, it's like kind of the same as having like your 3-star tanks, but you have access to Heimer and Malzahar, so it's a pretty decent option. Apart from that, you can also play Renata in this board, and it's the same concept. I mean, I guess you put like Renata more towards the middle. Any visionary board you can do, it works fine. Tristana. Okay, well, okay, Tristana's gonna be the same regardless. You are always gonna 4-star her. Your items are probably gonna be something like this, or like this. Or if you can find the thing like that. And your options are either Emissary for 6 Sentinel or 6 Bruiser. 6 Bruiser is actually like not so bad now. I think Bruiser Frontline has been underappreciated for a while, so it's finally getting its attention. So that's one option, and then next is just this board. Play around Tristana. You can also consider playing for Artillerist, however, I think your board is a little squishy, so if you drop these two, you have not much frontline. The thing is, with Tristana, you already get a lot of AD for free, and you're gonna get Tristana 4 for free, so I don't think you need 4 Artillerist. Because all the benefit you're getting from Tristana is already here, and like you're not rerolling Urgot anyway. So I do think you want a bit more frontline with this, worth the wait. And then the last option is just Sentinel, which is also like the same. And this is already like classic. I say Nocturne. Nocturne's played the same way, except the benefit is that you don't have to reroll on 6, you can reroll on 7. And you can reroll for Twisted Fate and Blitzcrank, or like Kog'Maw. Or if you have an Automata emblem somehow, you also can just not reroll anything. And you just push for 6 Automata and you have your Nocturne 4. But either way, this is the basic board you play in some way, shape, or form. But notice how this stuff doesn't fit on 6. So if you have your 3-star Nocturne for free, you can push 7 and then look for better traits. If you want to reroll on 7 for like this stuff, you can, but you probably wouldn't go for both of these at the same time. If you have an Automata emblem, you just go 9 and you look for Malzahar and you win that way. Because Nocturne 3 is enough early and then 4 is enough late. Good blood. Okay. Tech time. The cool tech. So we have seen this thing take over the meta. And yeah. I'm surprised it took as long as it did for that to leak, because I've known about that for a while. And they stole other stuff that I came up with more recently. So I'm surprised this one... I mean, I didn't even make this one, but I've known about it since day one from the person who made it. There's a better variation. Not a better, but like, it's just another variation, which is to play around the different units, which might have been spoiled by the what this is. So yeah, you play around Vlad. I mean, you don't need worth the wait for this, but like, it's just better in this case. Boom. Wait, what am I missing? Boom. So this board you can actually fits early. You don't have to reroll. So normally you would reroll this, and then you'd be like 4 Watcher until you hit. Like you'd be Watcher until you hit 4 Emissary, and then you hit 4 Emissary, 4 Watcher, and then yeah. But with this, you can get this for free. So you just push levels. You play around this. Play Ambessa secondary carry. And yeah, this is disgusting. This is pretty much Lone Hero Lux, except you don't need an augment. Well, actually, I mean, okay, you have worth the wait too in this case, but you don't need it. But if you have it, you pretty much have Lone Hero. And Vlad also already heals, so it'll be popular and meta once more people understand. So I'll skip around to the other option. I mean, okay, so normally you would be rerolling. So like the normal version of the comp without worth the wait, you're playing this. You either hit worth the wait Vladimir, or you hit worth the wait Vander, and then Vander 4 is like it's just better. And the reason being, this guy's immortal at 4-star. Like he's just actually immortal. So like at least Vlad like has the take time. Like this setup blocks him. You could set him free if you want, but he has a chance of being killed early on, so it's a little risky. Vander has pretty much no risk of being killed early on, so like he's just too tanky. And similar to the Vlad setup in Worth the Wait, you just push levels and you get 6 Watcher in early, and you don't worry too much about Vlad. You still hold Vlads, but you don't prioritize this. But this is played the same way, and you're broken. You also don't have to play with Vander specifically. You have the option of not playing Emissary, and instead you could play Family. It just makes it a little bit better for him. And then you just look for another carry. Like you have space for other stuff, so you can just play like random like LeBlanc or Victor or Jinx, whatever you can fit. Vander becomes very strong because his armor magic scaling is better. His base damage for his ability is really high. At 3-star, he can already one-shot. At 4-star, he will one-shot and overheal, or overkill and overheal. So it is pretty much Lone Hero Lux, except it's just Vander. And it's a 1 cost, and he also buys time for whatever backline you have. So if you actually do play a backline, like any backline you want, it doesn't have to be this. You don't have to do this at all. You can just play normal Vlad, and then you can play like Zoe. Around and something that has traits, yeah, like Sorcerer with Zoe. I don't know, there aren't that many traits that fit in. But like Automata. I mean you have like not that actually not that many slots. You have I guess the one. And this unit is disgustingly broken at 4-star. The last one is Ziggs. Ooh. So worth the wait Ziggs is really nice because it plays around how Ziggs wants to be played anyway, which is you just want to somehow teleport to Ziggs 3 and then push levels, but Worth the Wait already does that, so you are just teleporting to Ziggs 3 and then eventually to Ziggs 4 and you're pushing levels. So like it's just exactly what you want. So you just push levels and you hit your Ziggs 4 for free. Yeah, this is literally exactly what you want to do as Ziggs, because he's super awkward to reroll because he's a 2 cost, but everything you would want to reroll him is a higher cost. And the general game plan is hit Ziggs 3 as fast as possible and just push levels. You were doing that already, so you can literally just teleport to level 9, level 10, and yeah, this is like actually insanely strong. The only thing is that Ziggs is probably gonna get nerfed because people already understand that Ziggs is super strong. And if you get Ziggs 3 for free, and then eventually Ziggs 4, like let's say even the scaling on Ziggs 4, like the bomb is probably at least, okay, so 270 to 450, that's 180, so I would expect at least plus 200, and then with Dominator, yeah, no, it's absolutely absurd. The mini bombs should be at least 300. But that's worth the wait too.